All right, well, up next, we have Ryan Cooley, our engineering manager, who will be moderating this panel. The panel includes Ethan Preserg, our senior engineering manager, and a special guest, Matt Stauffer, who is the founder, CTO, and COO at Titan, which is a consultancy that specializes in Laravel. He's the host of the Laravel podcast and the author of O'Reilly's Laravel Up and Running. We do have a final panelist, Jason McCreary. Unfortunately, he could not be here due to COVID, but he was kind enough to send us a pre-recording with his answers. Jason has been a PHP developer for over 20 years. And if you're in the Laravel community, you might know him as JMac, the creator of Laravel Shift. They will be discussing the future of Laravel on this panel. Go ahead, Ryan.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. Much appreciated. Hey, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Ethan, thank you for being here as well. Good to see everyone. So the reason that this panel is so important to us here at Process Maker is that we're built on Laravel. Everything we do is built on Laravel. It's the foundation for our platform. So naturally, the future of Laravel is really important to us. So let's get into it and get into some questions. How do you think Laravel will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years? It's a tough question. Got to think ahead a little bit. But Matt, why don't you take the first question if you could?
Yeah, sounds great. One of the things I get the opportunity to do is to talk to Taylor, Taylor, the founder of Laravel, if y'all aren't familiar, as he's processing the sort of shifts that kind of come through in the industry. And so far, what I've been able to find is that we're finding more and more people from outside of the PHP and Laravel worlds looking to Laravel as people who are leading thinking in terms of how to basically create code that makes it more possible for people to build powerful applications. So normally what I would say is, oh, we're going to be watching what other people are doing and keeping up. And that is true. You know, for example, tools like Laravel Livewire was inspired by Phoenix and a couple other outside ecosystems. So there are definitely people who are doing cool things and we watch what they're doing and we see people within the Laravel community kind of paying attention to those things. But more and more, we're also seeing that Laravel itself ends up being one of the leaders because it has such a strong community of people trying to innovate that it's often, how are other people keeping up with Laravel? So in general, between what Taylor's doing and the other people in the Laravel community who are paying attention to what's going on outside of Laravel, at least for now, it seems like everybody's just kind of keeping on top of everything. And I know we'll talk a little bit later about some of the specific aspects of that, but for right now, I don't see any signs of it changing outside of PHP. I don't see any signs of it changing outside of being a full stack application development framework. And I don't see any reason for it not to just keep up with what comes next for the next 5 to 10 years, even though none of us know exactly what that is.
Right. Ethan, what do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view, man. I wonder how do you reconcile that with the major shift we're seeing with AI, specifically, all the buzz around ChatGPT, and all the incredible things you're able to do now without having to write full-fledged applications, combined with all the serverless technology today. So I know that's also part of what we want to talk about a little bit, serverless. So how does that reconcile with everything that you're saying?
Yeah, so AI and ChatGPT and OpenAI and other tools like that are being used in development in 2 primary ways. One of them is assisting people in writing code, and one of them is assisting the actual applications themselves. Assisting people in writing code is something that any programmer in any language has the opportunity to use using tools like GitHub Copilot, where it says, oh, you're trying to build blah, blah, blah. I will show you existing examples. But those types of things require original programmers to have written the examples that those things are consuming. So without people actually writing code, writing blog posts, writing open source software, those tools don't have anything to operate from. They're not innovating, they're not creating, they're just copying what other people have written and making it available to the people who didn't write it in the first place. When you talk about AI, when it comes from an actual building applications perspective, AI is a technology that has to be integrated with, just like every other technology has to be integrated with. So it's sort of like people are saying, oh, the printing press means we're not going to do this anymore. No, it's just a new way of thinking about it. So for example, if you ask the questions of, well, what does it look like for us to change our development mentality and methodologies using AI? Well, you want to look at who's thinking deep and interesting thoughts about how to do that. And there are already 3 major players in the Laravel world doing AI-based research, tools, software as a service, and integrations with both Laravel and Laravel development tooling, saying, oh, like if you want to look at a guy named Marcel Potziot, he's like already built 3 or 4 tools based on using OpenAI to bring powerful things into your Laravel apps and your Laravel development workflows. So are we going to see shifts in that? Sure. But a lot of people think that things like no code or AI means nobody's going to write code anymore. But in the end, like somebody's writing the code to power the no code platform. So are we going to see shifts here and there in those things? Absolutely. I love anything that moves towards the democratization of creation of content and interactivity and applications. AI does that. Laravel also does that. There's a lot of people who'd say, oh, Laravel is something bad because it makes more people able to write applications. I'm like, no, I want more people to be able to write applications. So if AI allows even more people to be able to build even more robust applications, great. But it's all going to have to come together somewhere. It's all going to have to hook into something. And so if that something is an app or it's a no-code framework or a no-code thing that's built on an app, there's going to be code somewhere. And so, I don't know if that answers well, but that's my general thought.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. I haven't thought about it like that.
Yeah, the way I like to think about AI sometimes is it's really an acceleration tool. It's a way to help accelerate the process. The same way Laravel, as you mentioned, that the same way Laravel has accelerated the process and opened up the process of developing applications for people. It used to be, I remember before Laravel, we had a hodgepodge of different frameworks, and a lot of those are still out there and they're great. But even before that, you would have to write all of the boilerplate stuff from scratch. And now Laravel really enables you to get in and build an application more quickly than ever. And I think AI is hopefully going to supplement that and enable people to move that much more quickly. So that's
to that point, Ryan. I don't know if this is dating me, but like, when I think about the days when I coded in things like CodeIgniter, if you guys recall those old frames, or Fuel PHP versus Laravel, things have come a long way.
Yeah, they definitely have. Yep, CodeIgniter was one of my old favorites as well. So, let's move on a little bit to talk a little bit about new features and improvements. We just came out with Laravel 10. What are we seeing out of Laravel 10 that we're most excited about? I'll let anyone take that question.
I'll defer to Matt on this one.
One of the cool things that came out in Laravel 10, there's actually two that I'm excited about. One of them is, three. The first one is we have a lot more type safety. Now, I'm not one of the types of people who think that we should become really strict. PHP has often the modern PHP development has often bounced a little bit between being a little bit more dynamic, because PHP is this dynamic language that has had tooling added to it to allow it to be more structured. And so it's in this weird space where it's a little bit like Java at times, or a little bit like some of the more structured languages with lots of types and structs and enums, that kind of stuff. But it also has been a little bit more like Ruby and JavaScript, where you just it's the Wild West and you do what you want. And a lot of the people who are developing core features for PHP want it to be much more structured. And it's interesting because I and a lot of the Laravel community say, we should allow the structure, but not require the structure. Because sometimes if you require the structure, then a lot of the tooling, a lot of the development workflows, a lot of the ideologies of working in PHP are no longer viable. So why don't we add types, add return types, add all that kind of stuff, but allow people to do what they want with it? So I've often actually publicly railed against people being too heavy on those things. That said, I think the fact that Laravel 10 adds type hints and return types to all of its stuff, if you're going to do types anywhere, it makes the most sense in open source software, because a lot of people are going to come along. They're going to wonder, what am I supposed to be passing this thing? Can I be sure about what's coming out of this thing? And types and return types, if nothing else, they're at least documentation, right? We don't have to have doc blocks that are now going to potentially get out of date. We're actually going to see it, but not only are we going to see it, we're going to feel a little bit more confident in it. So I'm really excited about that. The other thing I'm really excited about is Laravel Pennant. If y'all are familiar with the concept called feature flags, feature flags allow you to ship code that may not be ready for everybody. And instead of waiting for that code, letting it sit in a stale branch and potentially getting out of date before it's ready to ship, especially if you're doing things like continuous deliveries, where you push your code out very frequently, you push that code out, but you use something called a feature flag that defines that only certain people should interact with that new code that you've written. So you use a feature flag to only allow your beta testers to interact with a particular feature or whatever else. We've all been doing it from scratch. Laravel Pennant is now a first party, which means it's released by Laravel itself, way to do feature flags. And every single time that there's some process that we've all been making up as we go, and then Laravel builds it, not only do I think that Taylor tends to write them in probably the best way they can be written, but it means that's one less question we have to ask every single time we spin up a new thing that has feature flags. We don't have to ask, how are we going to do it? Is the syntax going to be like this, that, the other? No, we just use Pennant, and now that's one less question, which, to your point, Ethan, and also yours as well, Ryan, that's now one less thing we have to worry about, which means we can now do more creative and interesting things. AI allows us this, Pennant allows us this. The last thing, and this is because I'm a super nerd who's always interacting with like the CLI and kind of the underlining stuff, when we're dealing with processes. So basically, let's say you're using a Laravel app to spin up a long-running process that's actually a process on your server. We're not even talking about PHP processes. You're saying we're managing something like some long-running thing, you're using like a homebrew installed thing or something like that that runs an unzip, and that unzip is going to take forever, and you don't want your user to have to worry about it, so you kind of queue the thing. We've been using all these Symfony tools, and if you're not familiar, Laravel is based on Symfony. So every single time you're doing something in Laravel, there's a very good chance underneath the very nice and clever and clear Laravel interaction, there's a kind of a little bit kind of closer to the core, closer to the machine Symfony one. Symfony is powerful. Symfony was built with the intention for tools like Laravel to extend it, but their user experience doesn't tend to be the same as Laravel's. And so the fact that I reach down into the Symfony version every time I'm interacting with these long-running processes is like, okay, that's what I have to deal with. So the new Laravel 10 just came out with a process component that makes it a lot more Laravel-like to interact with these processes. You can say, was this process successful? Was it a failure? Can you run this process and throw an exception if this thing happens or whatever else? And so it's just a much more kind of easy API to interact with processes. There are a few other kind of like niceties, but I think those are probably the things I'm most excited about. And one of the things that's really interesting in Laravel as of late is that we're less and less likely to get big, new, exciting things in big releases, because the releases are mainly about breaking things. And so many new cool tools don't actually require breaking anything. And so they get released just as a part of, maybe it's Laravel 9.2 or 9.3 or 9.4. So it's less and less the case these days where the new version of Laravel comes with new stuff, because Taylor's like, well, if I can add it to the old stuff without breaking things, why not do that? So there are a few cool things about Laravel 10, but again, every new release of Laravel is less disruptive, less difficult to kind of transition to, and sometimes comes with less exciting stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Kind of in line with that, what new features or improvements do we think we'll see in future versions, or would we like to see in future versions? To your point, Matt, maybe it doesn't revolve so much around adding big, bold new features to the releases, but maybe it's first-party packages such as Pennant that interact really well with Laravel and do things the Laravel way. Do you think maybe that's kind of the direction that we're moving?
This is the hardest question for me to answer, because if there's something I want from Laravel, I either write it or I go poke Taylor and I say, can you please write this? So there's very seldom something that I want. And if I do want it, I'm in the middle of talking to Taylor about it, being like, hey, can we either do this? Or if he says, no, I don't want to do it, I'm like, cool, can we write this at Titan, So right now, no, I'm sure that between now and Laravel 11, there will be things that will come up, and then I'll interact with them. Like at some point, once the AI world settles down a little bit, we'll probably get a first party AI integration. But right now, we're not ready for that, right? Things are too up in the air. People are still figuring out which things to work with. And I think it's better to live in user land, meaning there's packages that non-Laravel have. So honestly, I don't have anything right now.
All right.
I have a couple of things, Ryan. You know me. So one of the first things that come to mind is really around, like you're saying, the user interface. So right now, the first class citizen for Laravel is Blade and Vue. So I would love it to be able to support a lot of the other popular options out there. So, having Angular as a first class UI component, since I am a diehard fan of Angular, for what that's worth. So those kinds of other frameworks or using something besides Blade, nothing's coming to mind right now, but there are alternatives. So like being able to switch out those components for its first class citizen aspect, like you can use the vanilla APIs of Laravel to interact with all these things, instead of it being Blade or instead of it being Vue, maybe swap it out for Angular. So I would love to see that.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if that's a direction we would go. I know, Laravel is it has a reputation as a very opinionated platform, which I think means we might see more focus rather than kind of diverging like that. But I think that would be an interesting option. I can see why that's something that you'd be interested in. In that same vein, do we think that Laravel will continue to be a popular choice among developers in the future? Tough to predict the future, but that's what this panel is all about. So
honestly, I think it'll depend on the future of PHP itself more than Laravel. Because as long as PHP remains a popular coding language, then people will be wanting to write good code. And there's just nothing even close to Laravel, in my personal opinion, because Laravel is just the king of PHP right now. So for Laravel to be for that to happen, I feel like PHP would have to just have a nosedive and not be used, which there are people out there that see it that way, all the Java and maybe some Python guys out there, but that's what I think. I don't know, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think that I think it's a good point that as long as PHP is a thing, Laravel is going to be probably one of the biggest players there. But it's interesting also because I feel like Laravel is helping PHP stay a thing as well. So WordPress has long been the biggest driver for the kind of the global popularity we see for PHP. People always talk about PHP powers, 75% of the internet, but the vast majority of those were WordPress. And so outside of WordPress, PHP is one of the normal players, right? It's not the biggest player. It's one of the normal players compared to Ruby, Java, .NET, and everything like that. But Laravel seems to be driving adoption. I hear stories, including my own, where we were leaving for other things. I mean, I was working in CodeIgniter, I was working in Fuel, and I was like, we don't have the same systems that all my friends who are working in these other languages do. I'm going to switch to Ruby on Rails. And we started working in Rails until I found Laravel, and then I came back. And it's a very common story we hear. So I think that not only will Laravel likely stay the top runner, in part because of just what I've seen in the PHP frameworks, but I also think that it's going to drive PHP adoption. Real quick, I will say why I believe that Laravel is going to stay the top runner. Of course, we can't predict the future, but the thing is, I've been here through when we all wrote vanilla PHP. I wrote a little mini CMS before WordPress came out. Like, I've been in the PHP world for a long time, and CodeIgniter had really good things going for it and some really bad things. Fuel PHP had some really good things going for it, some really bad things. Cake, same thing. Zend, same thing. And Taylor, for all, sometimes the way people talk about him as if he's a god or something like that, one of the reasons why people speak highly of him is because he noticed what those things were doing well. He also noticed what Sinatra and Rails and all these other frameworks were doing well, and WordPress, what drove adoption, what drove longevity. And he said, I want to build a community and a framework that provides those things for people. So it's a place where it actually sticks around and people actually want to stay there. And so he's very, very intentional in making it something that is an enjoyable space for people to work, that enables people to, I gave an entire talk about how Laravel is changing people's lives, and he's very intentional about that. He's like, I love hearing stories when people say, I was doing this, and now because of Laravel, I have this new life that I always wanted for my family, right? So as long as it is enabling people to change their lives that way by giving them really easy onboarding to a really powerful tool that allows them to build applications that gets them paid and allows them to fulfill their dreams, I feel like it's going to keep going.
I have another point that you just made me think of. And I don't know how much of this is a stretch, but it's kind of maybe it's kind of like saying, how likely is there, what's the future of the iPhone? How can the iPhone go somewhere? Well, I mean, how is the iPhone different to anything else? On my opinion, Steve Jobs. If without Steve Jobs, the iPhone would have just been another piece of tech. So I feel like, and I hope this is not too presumptuous, that Taylor is sort of playing that part of the Steve Jobs, but for Laravel. So as long as Taylor is kind of at the helm there, I feel like Laravel is going to keep skyrocketing. If that were to change one day, then I don't know, that might change things. What do you think about that, Matt?
Yeah, I think I wrote a blog post a while back about what happens if Taylor Otwell gets hit by a bus, just because we get asked that question so often that it's just something we want to address. I think that what you said is a great point. I think as long as Taylor is where he is, we are definitely set. If Taylor were to step down at some point, then it's a question. It's not an answer, right? It's not a definitive Taylor, Laravel's not doing well, but it's yet to be seen how other people would kind of take that role. And he's always had a succession plan set up. At any point, he said, if anything happens to me or if I step down, I want you to do this. I want you to do this. So like it's all kind of set. So nobody has to worry, oh, if anything happened to Taylor, Laravel would keep going, Laravel Forge would keep going, all those things would keep going. But that does not mean that those people have the same vision or anything like that he does. Now, it is helpful to know that over time, Laravel has become more and more of a group effort. So it is less and less just the Taylor show. Like many pieces of Laravel can keep running completely smoothly without him. The biggest piece that would be unsure about whether they were going to do that, though, is the vision. It's just like you're talking about. The thing that is hardest to replace is the stuff that we don't know if it's replaceable until we get to that point and see what happens. So can it continue being functional, valid, viable, continue pushing out releases? Yes. CodeIgniter struggled because CodeIgniter 3 took so long to come out because of internal issues with the people who own CodeIgniter, that even though you had a shift in who was owning the thing and who was running the thing, they weren't able to do the work because there was so much bureaucracy and there was so much kind of drama going on there. So the good news is, if we get to a point where Taylor's innovation and creativity is no longer there, you're still going to get all the systems and structures that keep it going. It might just, I don't even want to say stagnate. It might become a little bit less the absolute leader all the time. And it now is just going to kind of keep going at a normal pace. So even if that happens, when you have the amount of like embedded momentum that Laravel has, it might slow down a little bit, but it's already moving so much that I wouldn't even be concerned about that too much.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to a little bit of what we talked about. We kind of have this symbiotic nature between Laravel and PHP, right? Where Laravel is driving PHP growth and PHP may be driving Laravel growth to some extent as well. I want to talk about not just growth, but development. So in terms of development, how does the future of Laravel impact the future of PHP? Are there things that are happening in the Laravel world that cause the PHP developers to kind of change course? And vice versa, are there things coming out in PHP 8.2, 8.3 that are going to impact Laravel going forward? Matt, why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, so PHP, like I said, a lot of the people who are contributing to the core of PHP right now are folks who are a little bit more inclined to do things in a more rigid, structured, planned, we should force the programmers to work this kind of way mindset. And that's a little bit less the way Laravel works. And so we could hit a point where some of the releases that they do in that direction are actually prohibitive to Laravel being as free and open as it wants to be. Because if there's a language level thing that forces something, then Laravel is going to be, stuck with that forcing. That said, one of the things that we try to do in Laravel is to have a positive working relationship with the PHP community, because I'm in Laravel and I'm also in PHP, right? So I'm making friends with the people who are kind of running that PHP stuff, and we're trying to put our money, put our time, put our effort, put our resources, whatever it is, towards helping things. Like, for example, there's a thing that came out in PHP where it was short closures. And so instead of every single time you're doing an anonymous function, you have to write function, parentheses, brace, new line, whatever. There's a way to do a shorter closure like you have in JavaScript, but they only work in a single line right now. And somebody was trying to propose, what does it look like to do a short closure that's multiple lines? So it's still more concise, it's still more clear. Well, the Laravel community and a few people in particular were pushing really hard to make that happen, and it didn't happen. But for technical reasons. And so, for example, when Laravel sees things that we think are going to give a better developer experience, Laravel can only paste over so many PHP developer experience issues, right? Sometimes we're just stuck with what PHP has. And so in those moments, people in the Laravel community have been pushing and also, again, paying money, doing whatever we can to try and help the PHP developer experience to be positive. So not stopping the stuff that adds more type-related stuff, but at least aiding and abetting the stuff that helps some of the simpler and more dynamic and easier things. So Laravel is trying to influence the PHP community towards, not only building things that are more for structure, rigid enterprise stuff, but also some things that are better developer experience. And yeah, I do think that if PHP, were to make some very extreme changes, and all of a sudden it means that certain ways that Laravel works would be, impossible, there'd be a big conversation that we'd have. But so far, the working relationship between Laravel and the PHP core folks, and also the PHP, I'm trying to remember what it is, but there's a group run by a guy at JetBrains, and it's the PHP Foundation, I think. they're trying to, and was run by Roman Pronsky, they're trying to make sure that everybody, including WordPress people, including Laravel people, have a voice, have the ability to put some money in and get some people doing some core development work, not just because they share the ideas of the people who happen to be doing development work in the PHP world right now, but also so that everybody's represented. Because like, for example, the most PHP developers out there are WordPress and Laravel developers, but there are no WordPress or Laravel developers who are actually doing core development work in PHP right now. And so it's like, oh, well, what does it look like for us to try and have a better kind of collaboration between those groups? So I know that's kind of mismatched, but
to that point, hypothetically, where there was some, let's just call it, irreconcilable differences between Laravel and PHP. Do you think Laravel, I guess Taylor, would consider maybe forking PHP to keep it the way that Laravel envisions it, or would you maybe just do something different?
My guess is that would be what happened. I think it's really unlikely. I think it'd be much more likely that Laravel would hire a full-time programmer to contribute to the core and say, hey, I understand that some of these things are things that y'all don't want to build because you want to maintain it. We will pay this person solely to maintain these features so that we can kind of keep working this way. There was a person in the Laravel community who was talking quite a bit about a PHP fork back when there's a couple conversations around PHP forks, but it didn't go anywhere. And there was a lot of cool ideas running around there. So again, if it came to the point of forking, my guess is that we would get together companies who do Laravel plus Laravel itself plus companies who do WordPress, and we just basically say, hey, can we put a whole bunch of money into a foundation and use this foundation to pay some people to maintain this fork? But we'd much rather pay those people to just continue contributing to the PHP core. But yes, if it got to that point, it'd be much more affordable and manageable to maintain a fork than it would be to completely rewrite it in some other language or something.
Gotcha. Matt, how will Laravel, and how has Laravel adapted, do you think, to web development trends, serverless architecture, microservices, things like that? Obviously, we've seen Laravel Vapor, but how do you think that project is going?
Laravel Vapor is great. Tons of our clients use it. Mohammed Saeed used to work for Laravel and doesn't anymore, and he's continuing to do a lot of teaching. He's created courses and books and stuff like that about serverless. And also Jack Ellis, who runs Fathom, has taught a lot about serverless. So between the official Laravel Vapor and then also people in the community teaching all the specific nuances about how to do that, there's also Laravel folks at places like Fly.io who give different serverless things. So there's all the options in the world to do Laravel and serverless. And the good news is Laravel Vapor being a first party thing means Taylor was feeling the pressures of changing the way the system and changing the way Laravel worked to make it work in serverless in a way he would not have if somebody else was saying, hey, I want to run it in serverless. And he's like, wow, that's a lot of big changes. That's kind of annoying. So the fact that he was the one feeling the pain as he was developing Vapor was really valuable, because that means that he was able to make core shifts to the internals, not stuff that really changes the user experience, but maybe this bootstrap is loaded a different way, or this cache is, more configurable or something like that in a way that is required for serverless, but you wouldn't need anywhere else. Taylor made those changes himself. And so we were able to just kind of like get the benefit of that. When it comes to microservices, there was a conversation a while back where Taylor was basically being pressured to try and make a slimmer, smaller version of Laravel. And so he did. And it turned out to be a lot of work to maintain. And the majority of the time that people wanted to work with that tool, they ended up having to re-enable a whole bunch of Laravel specific things instead. So what he basically ended up telling people was just use Laravel. Here's some caches that you can turn on that's going to make it super fast. And so it's interesting because a lot of people think that they should have a microservice, like Slim is still out there. So if you want to use something like Slim, but Laravel's is not anymore. Just use Laravel. And that's kind of the main thing. So if you want to have, a Laravel application with 16 microservices and you want them all in Laravel, great, make 16 Laravel applications, right? So Laravel adapts to microservices in the same way it does with everything else. It's just telling you, do whatever you want, right? So if you want a Laravel app that's API only, great. And there are some conveniences that make it for certain contexts, like if you want to make a controller that's for API only, there's a flag you can pass in when you're creating that controller. So there are certain spaces where Laravel has done work to make sure that if you're building API only applications or building front end only applications, you can do little switches or little toggles to make each individual install more contextualized for that. So it's not like every install is expected to be a full stack app. But outside of that, microservices with Laravel work, whether the microservice is in Laravel or in something else, because you're still mainly just communicating over HTTP. And so at that point, you can build it with Guzzle, you can build it with a Laravel HTTP client or whatever else you want.
At the end
So
of
that's
the day, just an endpoint, right?
You say it again. I was talking.
At the end of the day, everything is just an endpoint at the end of the day, right?
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I do have a few more questions. Before we get into those, I do want to make sure everyone's aware. You can ask us questions. The Q&A function is open. Please feel free to ask us some questions. We're happy to get into them. One person did ask, Edgardo asked about performance with Laravel. So I know we have Laravel Octane. Matt, can you talk a little bit about the direction Laravel is headed in terms of performance?
Yeah. So Octane allows you to use some underlying PHP tools that basically allow you to do stuff in parallel and stuff like that. It's much more complicated stuff that you don't need, but if you're you don't need it in a lot of context, but if you're in a place where you need it to go a lot faster, you want to use one of these tools. There's Swool, and I can't remember what the other one is, but they're basically like more core level system things that allow you to hyper optimize the performance of your threading and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to nerd about all that kind of stuff, you can use Octane. The thing is, most of us don't need to. The vast majority of time, if you look at a Laravel website, the performance optimization issues fall into two places. One of them is the front end. Your images are too big. Your CSS is not optimized. Your JavaScript is not, being right at the right time. And the second one is the database. And the thing is, Laravel does its best to help you write good database queries, but in the end, database queries are on you to optimize. So if you have not checked out Laravel debug bar, I definitely check that out, because anytime you're on a page and you hit the debug bar, it'll tell you, here's all the queries that you've run, and here's how to make sure that those queries are optimized. And often when you do the debug bar on a slow page, you're like, oh, I thought that thing was being run once, but it's actually an n+1 query, meaning every single time this other query runs, it has to rerun the same thing over and over and over again. If you're interested in learning more about database optimization, there's all sorts of people in the Laravel world talking about that stuff. But Jonathan Renink is probably my favorite teacher in terms of optimizing your database queries. It's REININK. In general, though, Laravel itself is super, super fast. I mean, we're talking tens of milliseconds for basic boot. And then anything that is known to be slow for Laravel, for example, reading your config off the file system, there's caches for those. So anytime you're doing a basic Laravel deploy, you want to run all those basic caches, cache your views, cache your config, cache a couple other things. And if you cache those things, then 8% of the things that are slow, even, and we're talking milliseconds of slowness, you can cache all those out of there. And so again, you can get to 10 millisecond loads on pages that have database reads if you do all your basic Laravel good with no fancy servers, no fancy Octane or anything like that, but you're just optimizing your database queries, your caches, and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Very good. Like I said, Q&A is open. We have about 5 more minutes left. One topic I wanted to talk a little bit about is Laravel, the Laravel community, Laravel developers. I think it's interesting that people on their resumes and LinkedIn will sometimes identify as PHP developers, sometimes identify as Laravel developers. I wonder if we're going to start to see more people identifying as Laravel specific developers as their specialization. Also, the Laravel certification program went through, had a little bit of drama earlier in the year. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. Matt, have you seen more and more people specializing in Laravel versus the more general PHP?
Yes, and there's a couple of reasons for that in my mind. One is because we have a lot more young people who have joined whether young in age or young in their programming, they join the programming world and they choose a framework that they're going to work with, and they live in that framework. So it's like, for example, when people learned jQuery back in the day, they learned just enough JavaScript to write jQuery. So they weren't a JavaScript programmer. They weren't going to sit and write JavaScript all day long. With Laravel, it's a little bit different because you do have to fully understand PHP in order to write Laravel. But the inverse is not necessarily true. You can call yourself a PHP programmer and say, oh, I can work in any PHP framework. This happens often where I interact with companies who have a Laravel code base. They hired somebody who has PHP programmer on their thing. It turns out that PHP programmer doesn't know anything about Laravel. And so they're rewriting things from scratch that are already built in Laravel. They're not up to date. They're doing things that actually contradict Laravel security practices or whatever else. And they're actually making the applications less secure because they don't understand what comes out of the box. So there's a lot of value coming to people in terms of naming that they're a Laravel programmer, because it's not just about being able to write PHP. It's about fully understanding the ethos and the opportunities and the tools that are available in Laravel that you can't have just from opening Laravel up for the first time. So that's kind of like in terms of putting it on the portfolio. I do see a lot of people putting Laravel specifically on their resume. There's a pushback always from the old school PHP people. They're always just out here saying, you're not a Laravel programmer, you're not a WordPress programmer, you're a PHP programmer. And it's this idea that there's some sort of like purism from aligning yourself with your language, as if language is the ultimate line and anything below or above language doesn't count. And I'm like, why is language more important than anything else? If you say you're a PHP programmer, why don't you just say you're a web programmer? You can't say you're a PHP programmer, you're a web programmer. No, like identify however you want, specialize however you want, and name it however you want. And if people want to hire Laravel programmers, then they're going to look for you. So if people put Laravel programmer on their resume and everyone's hiring a PHP programmer, okay, maybe that's going to hurt them. But that's not what's happening. People have Laravel apps. They want people who know Laravel, and those people are matching together just fine.
Gotcha. Very good. All right. Well, with that, we're just about out of time. Before we go, I do want to give everyone the opportunity to tell people where you can be found online. So Ethan, where can people find you online? What's the latest that you're working on?
You can find me on Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn, normal social media. You can also reach out to me on Process Maker as well.
Okay, awesome. Matt, where can people find you? Oh, sorry.
Mainly on Twitter at Stauffer Matt, but if you go to mattstauffer.com, you'll see links to my Mastodon, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to put out a new YouTube video every 2 weeks. So yeah, YouTube, Twitter, and my website.
Nice. And Mastodon. I like that. Very good. I'm at Ryan Cooley on Twitter and Mastodon, so you can find me there. Right now, we're going to go to Jason McCreary. He was unable to join us for the live portion of the panel, but he did answer some questions via video. So I believe Michelle is going to play that panel from Jason. As Michelle mentioned earlier, Jason is the creator of Shift. That's a service that helps developers to automate the process of updating Laravel. We use that here at Process Maker. It's awesome. We love Laravel Shift. And we're sad that Jason wasn't able to join us live, but we do have a video from him. So Matt, Ethan, thank you so much for your time, and thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
How do you think Laravel will evolve in the next 5 to 10 years? It's kind of hard. I really don't think 5 to 10 years out. Time has kind of proven that PHP frameworks come and go, and I think Laravel has stuck around for a pretty long time. I wouldn't necessarily say that we've seen peak Laravel, but going another 10 years, I don't know. That the odds are against it. But another 5, I definitely see, being in the cards for Laravel. Even if we have seen peak Laravel, I think that there would be a slow decline of users and adoption that you would still kind of make it another 3 or 5 years. As far as devolution, I fully expect Laravel to continue kind of sticking with the latest and greatest web technologies. They've proven time and time again that they are always adopting kind of the latest tools out there for web development, the latest conventions and best practices. So, they'll continue to do that and continue to keep Laravel fresh. What new features or improvements would you like to see in future versions of Laravel? This is actually something I've pushed for a long time now. I really would like to see a smaller footprint when you first install Laravel. You get some things that I would consider legacy out of the box. A good example are kernel and service providers. I don't think these are things that a lot of applications are customizing immediately. And I also think they're concepts that new developers may not be familiar with. And again, they're not customized that often. So to have them removed kind of makes Laravel feel a little easier to work with out of the box. There aren't these kind of like initial questions of, oh, well, what's in this folder and what's in this folder and what are these things? You can get a much smaller footprint and really start to focus on what you're actually building custom within your application. And Laravel kind of hides a little bit more. Again, something I've talked about for a long time. I think that could be an improvement for kind of the developer experience and kind of the approachability of Laravel as it continues to evolve. As far as features, I think Laravel's pretty feature rich, and a community that definitely adds anything that is potentially missing. So I probably wouldn't change much other than maybe that initial footprint. Will Laravel continue to be a popular choice among PHP developers in the future? Yeah, I think this goes back to kind of the evolution and kind of the next 5 to 10 years for Laravel. I definitely think it'll continue to be popular. Again, even if we are at kind of peak Laravel, I think just the sheer inertia or momentum of the framework will kind of propel it another couple years to where it'll remain the popular choice. How will growing popularity of other PHP frameworks affect Laravel's market share? Naturally, I think it would take from Laravel's market share, but again, I think that's a long row to hoe, as they would say. I think that it's not. That's going to take some time. Laravel's definitely one of the most popular, if not the most popular, PHP framework currently, and to kind of knock them off the top is going to take something pretty interesting in the PHP community. I honestly wouldn't know what that looks like. So for those reasons, I think Laravel's got plenty of time. Will the adoption of new PHP features such as PHP 8 affect the future of Laravel? Definitely. Laravel, again, tries to use best practices, tries to kind of remain maybe not the bleeding edge, but definitely the leading edge of PHP 8's of PHP's features. And you can see even in just the recent release of Laravel 10, the latest version of Laravel, that they bumped up to PHP 8.1. They're adopting type hints, they're adopting new features more. So I think there's some pretty good feedback that's going on kind of between PHP and Laravel that kind of keeps Laravel again fresh and using kind of the latest features of the language. How will Laravel adapt to new web development trends such as serverless architecture and microservices? Again, Laravel is keeps things fresh, as I said, and serverless architecture is already kind of a checkbox. If you look at Laravel Vapor, this is something that runs on AWS Lambda. Microservices are, at least historically, were covered by the Lumen framework. I think now at this point you would just use Laravel directly. Lumen's kind of have a slow death. It's feature complete. It's not getting a lot of development. And I think even Taylor would tell you just use Laravel at this point if you're building microservices, because again, you don't have to use the views or all these other things. You can kind of strip those out, which is what what Lumen was doing in the first place. So I think any new trends that pop up, you'll definitely see Laravel and the Laravel team tackle. So what impact will the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning have on Laravel's development? I think the same development, kind of impact on developers in general. Laravel being a framework, maybe more so. I could totally see through artificial intelligence and machine learning the ability to create the basic components of applications by just asking these tools to do it for you. Something along the lines of, create me a blog in Laravel. I could see that generating a lot of code for you kind of out of the box. So I definitely see that in the future for those tools. You might already be there in some regards, but even something where generate a checkout flow using PayPal or using Stripe or whatever with Laravel. I could see those being something that you might be able to ask one of these tools and engines to do for you. Will the community continue to actively contribute to the Laravel ecosystem in the future? Yes, definitely. I think Laravel has a very vibrant community. As a member of the community myself, I feel like I'm going to continue to work exclusively within Laravel, as far as my contributions. And again, such a large and popular framework that's used by so many, you're naturally going to get a lot of activity. And I think Laravel has more than most, again, maybe because of some of that energy, because of some of that kind of pushing towards SaaS and so forth that you might see within the community that you don't necessarily see in all the other or broader PHP community. How will Laravel address security concerns and stay up to date with industry best practices in the future? I think Laravel falls back on the community a lot for these types of things. Again, having such an active community, if Laravel were to release something that is maybe a potential attack vector or maybe doesn't follow what the best practices are, you'll see a PR into the framework, days, if not hours, if not minutes after that's released. So there's a lot of feedback that comes from the community. And, again, the more people you have looking at it, the more eyeballs you have on it, I think the more you're going to get for that for Laravel. So, I think that's something that they'll continue to fall back on the community for. What new industries or use cases could Laravel potentially expand into in the future? That one's a tough one. I think Laravel can do anything, of course, that PHP does, and PHP is kind of considered the glue of the web. But to that point, I don't see Laravel breaking into like a tool that you would use for iOS development, iOS app development. That's not something Laravel is going to do. That's not to say it couldn't be used for the back end or some of those pieces. I see Laravel probably staying a full stack framework for the duration, of its kind of lifespan. But that's not to say that it might not be used in more things, as they come out in the future. But I think web development, is probably going to be first and foremost. I don't think you're going to see Laravel used immediately for anything else. It probably just wouldn't be the right choice because that's not its focus. But with that said, the community, again, does do more things with Laravel than you might think. For example, there's Laravel 0, which is a package that you can use for creating CLI applications, and it feels and offers a lot of the features of Laravel, a Laravel application, but it's catered more towards the UI, not necessarily being the web, but being the command line. So again, I think you see tools where Laravel is applied, but I don't see it jumping too much farther outside of kind of the developer scope. Again, not to something like mobile apps or anything of that nature.
Great. Thank you so much to Jason. And again, thanks to Ryan, Ethan, and Matt. Matt, I know you have a very busy schedule, so I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.